Hello, and thank you for attending today's webinar. We will be beginning shortly. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. We'll begin the webinar in just about a minute. Thank you so much for your patience. All right. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Hacking the COVID Cold Chain, How to Identify, Quantify, and Remediate Attacks on the Vaccine Cold Chain. My name is Jessica Vos. I'm the Director of Demand Generation at SafeBreach, and I will be your host for today's webinar. I'm very happy to introduce our two presenters for today. First, we have Colin Connor, who is the Global Threat Intelligence Strategic Analyst at IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence. Hello, Colin.
Hey, good afternoon, good morning to those attending across the world.
And next, we're also joined by SafeBreach CTO and co-founder of SafeBreach, Isaac Kotler. Hello, Isaac.
Hello, happy to be here.
Great. So a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. Our aim is, of course, to make this session as engaging for you as possible. We have a few polling questions planned, but we also, of course, encourage you to submit any questions that you might have for our presenters throughout today's session. We'll try to get to those as they come in, but also we'll be setting aside a little bit of time toward the end of the broadcast in case there are any that we haven't been able to address before the end of the broadcast. So make sure you keep those coming throughout the discussion today. All right, diving right in. Here is how we've structured our agenda for today. So we'll be covering what is known about the COVID-19 vaccine cold chain attacks. We'll be covering some detail about the targets and the threat actors of those attacks. We'll also be discussing a framework to assess the gravity of those threats and how to use attack simulation to identify and remediate, as well as recommendations for defenders on how to run a comprehensive threat analysis program to block attacks. And as I mentioned, we'll also be saving some time toward the end of the broadcast to address any questions that have come in throughout the broadcast. So to kick off today's discussion, I think first, obviously, we need to sort of set the stage on how and when the attacks and questions were first discovered. So Colin, can you walk us through some of the process of discovery by the IBM X-Force team and what it is that you learned?
Perfect, and thanks, Jessica. So my team, Melissa and Claire from my team, uncovered the highly targeted spear phishing campaign we published in our blog last year, back in October of 2020. The campaign took place just a month prior in September 2020 and was targeting, at this time, just the cold chain delivery system, specific organizations that provided material support that meet the transportations of COVID-19 cold chain. Definitely a big win for us because that not only we're able to bring this to light, but we really followed what I call as the 3 Ps: predictive, preventative, and proactive. That Melissa and Claire were able to predict that the cold chain was going to be targeted, monitored for that, and when it was realized, able to dig in deeper. So definitely the value of intelligence showed its value from that perspective. Since publishing this discovery, we've uncovered additional information emphasizing the global scale of this campaign. That as COVID has hit us all, that as well we saw COVID campaigns, some themed campaigns over a year ago, that COVID continues to be a very hot and of interest to multiple different groups. So we saw the campaign not only targeting individuals, but entities, corporations as well, spanning 14 countries, 44 different companies. So definitely much more substantial than we saw originally back in September of 2020. We even saw it spoofing the Chinese biomedical corporation and testing, targeting multiple tiers. And we'll dig into some of those different tiers. And overall, the campaign was focused on credential harvesting, be able to gain credentials. We have some theories and some ideas that why they would target for credentials, some of the objectives that the actors were looking to dig into. So let's move on to the next slide.
Go ahead.
Oh, one too many. So here, we've put this in our blog, a copy of the screenshot, pretending in this case UNICEF mandate directive project, that the spear phishing emails, like I said, not only were targeting individuals, but are also targeting corporations. Individuals they were targeting initially very specific, but as we continue to see the campaigns grow, CEOs, global sales officers, company presidents, anybody and everybody that could potentially have access to some of the information from that perspective. That since our initial blog, we've uncovered some additional spear phishing emails, much like the original, an email addressed example to a German pharmaceutical and bioscience solutions company involved in vaccine production. So when we start looking at the different areas, that the different industries, we start to see a broader picture that not only focused on the transportation, but focused on a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, even some of the dry ice manufacturing of being able to keep the vaccine cold. Let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah, so before we move on to the next slide, I think we wanted to go ahead and poll the audience here and ask, to your point of there's so many different titles, there's so many different functions, there's also so many different industries really that these attacks are relevant for. So we wanted to ask our audience here, what industry is your organization a part of, just so we can get a sense for the landscape of our attendees. And also, so maybe we can put a little bit of that information in as we continue the discussion today. But as I mentioned, and as you mentioned here, and we'll be looking at in sort of the next slide, it really was not restricted to healthcare or strictly pharmaceutical or vaccine developers. This is people all along the entire distribution supply chain. So we'll be keeping the poll open for another 30 seconds or so. And then once it's done, we'll close it out and we'll talk about some of the results. But in the meantime, Colin, if you want to start talking a little bit about just the wide range of industries really that were implicated in these attacks.
Perfect. No, sounds great. So, along those lines, you may ask, and I'm starting to see some questions roll in, that indicators of compromise, that we published some of those indicators of compromise, 50 different files that we've identified in these campaigns. We've provided those hashes, and of course, some of those are on VirusTotal that you can download those. What we saw is that once the system was infected, of course, that the command and control infrastructure would bring up the PDF user here. As social engineering, that automatically would populate, the login ID. So definitely being able to make it more personalized and something that is valid. So when we start to look at the different industries, and let's move to the next slide.
All right.
We see, of course, some of the transportation services first and foremost, even manufacturing, refrigeration is what you would see likely, what we saw initially, right? But then we started to see biomedical, so some of the healthcare, some of the web hosting, some of the software development, even some of the government communications, supranational organizations, as well as, like I said, the energy sector, not only from the manufacturing of solar panels, but also of some of the petrochemicals. One of the key components, as I mentioned, is dry ice, being able to chill the vaccine to keep it cold enough, long enough to keep it stable. That we saw targeting all across those industries. So from that perspective, that no longer just a very specific targeted campaign, a very broad and wide campaign.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like from our respondents, from the attendees, it looks like about 75% are coming from healthcare and 25% are reporting that they're coming from manufacturing. So obviously two of the most highly targeted, but definitely only just a subset of the entirety of all the targeted industries that are implicated in these talks. All right. And let's talk a little bit about sort of the threat actors and what you guys learned throughout the process.
So great question. So threat actors, I know many of you read our blogs, and we do say likely nation state. We took that, we didn't take that very lightly. Being able to say likely nation state, while we couldn't determine which nation state or which specific threat actor group, the sophistication here, as well as the targeting, as well as the long-term benefits that we see on some of this targeting. Again, they're gathering credentials to gain internal access to be able then to potentially gather additional information, makes us believe it's likely nation state. Be able to have that long engagement, that not that quick win, as well as some of the different targeting that we saw, that it's not the financial gain, as well as the malware, the service that we typically see from a criminal activity. Sure, they can deploy ransomware, but is not where we typically see. We typically see the kind of, from a criminal standpoint, like I said, not to run of the mill where it's quick path and clear cash out, that they would have to put additional time and resources in the operation to achieve their goal. Could be criminal, but the advanced nature of it, as well as the long-standing operation, that we believe that it's likely nation state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. And then, I mean, what are we talking about in terms of the implications? Obviously, if the aim was obviously access and to be persistent, then what are we talking about in terms of quote unquote what's on the table?
Great question. So along those lines, we saw the phishing campaign. We didn't see any exfiltration. We didn't see any data theft. So this is all speculation. But when we operate from an intelligence standpoint, we've done our research. We understand who is targeted, what information they have. So from that perspective, it could be some of the raw material providers, some of the collection of information, even blueprints for storage transportation could be their target, potentially accessing to upstream providers. When we saw initial targeting on some of the transportation and refrigeration companies, that makes sense. They are sharing or transporting that. But then when we saw the broader targeting, that some of that could be third-party access, gaining access to some of the dry ice manufacturers, for example, where is dry ice being sent to, that gaining some of the insights, being able to understand some of the movement and some of the collection of the vaccine, where it could be targeted. And then from disruption and destruction standpoint, that the potential depth of the vaccines to be sold or be distributed elsewise, or maybe even causing distrust or chaos from deploying or halting the vaccine. And then of course, the extreme is destruction of the vaccines. So from that perspective, what's on the table? Definitely a lot of different things, but more from what we saw more likely be, from an espionage standpoint, being able to disrupt and to collect and maybe even understand some more of the details of the vaccine, whether storage, etc., and not so much clear from a monetary standpoint, a financial standpoint.
Got it. Okay, well, before we move into the next section where we kind of talk about sort of risk assessment and how do we really quantify the risk that based on what you guys were able to find to all of these different industries and to these specific organizations that were implied in the cold chain distribution, we're going to open up another polling question for our audience. And really here we wanted to ask, are you using any sort of risk quantification framework today in your efforts? So go ahead and answer the question. Your options are yes, no, no, but planning to use one in the near future, or what's a risk quantification framework? And that will tell us pretty clearly where you are in terms of implementing or using a risk quantification framework in your security efforts. And while we're waiting on some of the answers to that question, Colin, I'm wondering, obviously there's lots of implications here, but this will not be the last vaccine that is developed and that is attempted to be distributed. So, how much do we really feel like a lot of these attacks and these threats are specific to the COVID vaccine distribution, and what might be just basically a model for threat actors to use for future vaccines and future efforts to target biopharmaceutical companies?
Great question. That we've seen definitely a shift from the physical activities of showing up on physical locations or maybe insider threats to the cyber domain, especially over the past couple of years. That travel restrictions as well as physical access has been limited. We've seen a large increase of cyber methodologies. So we predict, we forecast that this is going to continue to be a methodology, right? That especially where this is information that is pertinent to specific nation state or a specific objective. That we've seen some of the other nation states focus on different areas over the years, and we've seen them targeting of specific companies. We've seen targeted of specific databases to gather that information. So this is, I would say, not different than what we've seen in the past, but definitely from a very targeted standpoint of COVID-19, as well as, we've not seen a pandemic of the scale or something that is widespread as the scale in the past. So the breadth and depth of this campaign is definitely much more pervasive than we'll see something specifically focused on a specific area of an increasing maybe economic or political gain from that perspective.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for answering that. So looking at the results of the question, it sounds like about 20% of our audience is using some sort of risk quantification framework today. 20% are not. They responded no. Another 20% said no, but we are planning to use one in the near future. And 40% said, what's a risk quantification framework? So I think as we dive into sort of the next section here, it's probably worth just doing a basic level set on what is a risk quantification framework and how is it intended to be used?
Yeah, it's a great question. Risk has definitely been something that I've been focused on probably the past 10 years. Being a cyber threat intelligence lead, director, analyst, whatever my title is, manager, that how do we communicate that to the business? That no longer are we just a perimeter defense? No longer are we just a compliance checkbox. Really in the past 10 years, we've started to move in cybersecurity to become a risk, to be able to focus on risk, to be able to decrease and deter some of the risks, pay down some of the risks from that perspective. So the more that we can align our program to discussion of risks, to be able to quantify risks, that be able to not just qualify it, this is the high, medium, low, or from a risk standpoint, that here is the risk we need to deal with, be able to prioritize it from a quantum standpoint. That from a quantum standpoint, we have to engage in things that executives understand, that our leadership understands. And that's where dollars and cents come in. Various frameworks out there, some that are championed by some and some that are championed by others. Me, I'm for the most part agnostic on a specific framework. So, but the value is from a prioritization standpoint, that relevant and reliable, right? That that a single incident is much different than system-wide compromise, much different than a business continuity impact caused by ransomware, for example. So we have to change some of these security terms and techniques into language that we can communicate to our leadership. Definitely a challenge to be able to speak that language. We've seen the rise of BISOs, business information security officers, that can do that. So it's definitely something, like I said, in the past 10 years that we've seen, and be able to not just say, here's my incidents, but here's the so what. Why does this manage to the business? Or from a defense standpoint, and that's where ITSEC will get into a bit deeper, is that how are my security controls standing up against some of these attacks? Not necessarily this ransomware, but this actor with their techniques, tactics, and procedures, TTPs, we like to call in the industry. So let's move to the next slide. And I gave a talk at SANS CTI Summit back in January. You can definitely pull that up on YouTube and dig into the methodology a bit deeper. But from an executive standpoint, too long didn't read. We often will generate long reports of why things are important. That when we start looking at from a visual standpoint, as well as being able to communicate the areas of business risk, that a visual representation like this is very valuable. As you can see, the intent and capabilities that from a security analysis, we can determine the cold chain targeting that we said a large proponent of you joining today are from the healthcare industry, and the other portion was from manufacturing. That why is this important to us, this targeting? This is not just a phishing campaign, this is a phishing campaign that could potentially disrupt our operations or steal information. So being able to say, okay, the intent is high because we're in this industry, that the capabilities we've seen so far from this actor seem to align with a lot of the different phishing techniques. So nothing new from that perspective, but the intent is increased. So when we look at the likelihood from a quantification standpoint, we can start to put numbers on the chart, right? That a low could be a 1 and a high could be a 10. So we start to see the intent is an 8, the capability is a 4. So the likelihood we can determine some level of comparison and some level of frequency from that perspective. Of course, the impact of the theft of that data, the impact of the operations of maybe the delivery of the vaccine will be unique to each different organization. But from the likelihood that we can use some of the intelligence data, some of the reports that my team has provided, like I said, Claire and Melissa, definitely want to continue to congratulate them on their hard work on this, that can add value. So that's where now we have these different samples that we've shared, the different URLs in some cases on different reports. That how do we take that that information that has been shared and map it to our infrastructure, map it to the protection capabilities of our security controls. So we can say, while the likelihood is high that we're going to be targeted, that our security defenses here are significant because we've ran through these 50 different files, and not one of them were able to steal credentials. We saw that all of our security technologies working in synergy to be able to protect the environment. So I will now transition to ITSEC and have him walk through being able to take those files and be able to show that that the likelihood of being targeted, is further diminished, and maybe even sometimes brings to light gaps in our security posture.
All right. Yeah. So bringing in Isaac here. Yeah. I mean, let's talk now a little bit about how attack simulation can help a team really mount a comprehensive sort of threat analysis program. So probably first we should cover off on just what is breach and attack simulation, exactly what does it do?
Definitely. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Jessica, for starting with this great question. So as Colin walked us through the different concepts of risk and how risk should be addressed or thought of, the almost immediate question is, once we chose our threat landscape, once we chose the threat actors or the different types of threats that we agree that could be operated on our company, the next step is to go ahead and test them. And that's exactly what breach and attack simulation should do for you. This type of technology, this type of a platform should continuously bring a safe way for you to consume all these different attack methodologies, as Colin mentioned, the TTPs and the IOCs. You would like to understand how those would play out in your environment, given your controls and your different security solutions. And so breach and attack simulation is designed to continuously test your security controls, whether those are technology driven, like your firewalls or your EDR and AV solution, as well as the human element in your security posture, such as your SOC that should be monitoring the different events and could at any point intervene and make a recovery or mitigation. And so taking this technology throughout your company's approach, this is something that you should expect to be sit on a cloud environment, something that should be sitting on an on-premise, employees' laptops, third parties, contractors, essentially, as Colin presented, whichever way is the attack vector that is being applicable by you, whether it's phishing emails, the people that you would believe will become the victims of those phishings and their machines, this is essentially determine where the platform should provide the value and what kind of attacks you can expect to see from that. And I think we have another poll question coming up that will be very interesting to hear your opinion about. And that is, do you think that right now in your company, your security controls could right now stop the COVID supply chain attack, as Colin walked us through?
Yeah, so your options here are yes, no, or I'm not sure. And that third option is just as legitimate as the others, because we'll be talking a little bit about sort of what could be a follow-up question to this polling question, which is, if you do think your security controls right now could stop a COVID supply chain attack, how do you know? And that's really what we're going to be talking a little bit about next here. So let us know, and we'll be kind of diving into sort of the next discussion, which is kind of how breach and attack simulation does provide the answers to some of those questions.
Yeah, and just to follow up, Jessica, on your comment about I'm not sure, it's a very valid question, and I would not be surprised to say that this will be the perhaps one of the winning options in this poll, is because really, when you think about our security controls, we purchase the right solutions, we maybe position them in the right places, but how do we really know? How can we really take the adversary and in a safe way test ourselves against it? It's a hard question, and it's definitely an opportunity to better explore how we can get a data-driven answer to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it looks like right now it's moving a little bit. There's still some people submitting their answers, but it sounds like I'm not sure is about 66% of the answers, and then yes is 33% of the answers. So nobody said no, but we are seeing that 66% of the audience is saying legitimately, I'm not sure. So let's talk about that.
Sure. So first of all, I am happy for the customers, the people that have voted yes. I'm very happy to hear that. And of course, the I'm not sure is definitely a reasonable answer to give in this situation. So let's talk a little bit about how do we actually get to this truth? How do we actually get to a definitive data-driven answer about how safe am I with respect to a ransomware, with respect to a threat group, with respect to a phishing email? So the idea of taking a breach and attack simulation is to have a platform that from one hand weaponize the different TTPs and IOCs. And we can think of it in multiple layers. The weaponization can come in a sense of trying to use the same malicious binaries as uncovered by IBM in the X-Force here, and essentially try to see if the hashes that Colin previously mentioned, that are some of them available in VirusTotal, could they right now pass our security defense? And so if our company invested in an email gateway, and that's just an example of a security controller, then it would make sense to see if this security email gateway would kick in and basically won't allow those malicious attachments to go through. Now, taking it a step further, there could be multiple configurations for that email gateway. It could be external address to internal address, somebody sending it outside of our organization. It could also be the case that maybe perhaps one of the employees got hacked in a separate out-of-bound attack vector, and now the adversary is trying to leverage his or her credentials within the company to send an email, the same phishing email from an internal position, internal email to other people within the company in an attempt to lateral move. And so as you can see in this very simple example, we already uncovered there is a couple of different weaponization possibilities. It could be the text, it could be the link, it could be the malicious attachments. There's a couple of configuration, external to internal, internal to other internal addresses. And now we'd expect this platform to actually go and systematically test it. So again, it could be that today we're doing very good about this front, and then tomorrow a misconfiguration can happen. And why should this misconfiguration happen? Well, it depends. It could be the job of an adversary weaken the configuration, so he or she will have an easier time to get their job done, or it could be just an honest mistake. Or in some cases, in other types of controls like firewalls and EDR, coverage by itself could possess a challenge. Maybe our company has expanded from the infrastructure perspective. We have a new cloud environment. We have a new data center. Are we sure the traffic there goes through the same security controls as we expected? So as you can see, the idea is to run it into our process, is to get all these what-if questions and have them systematically work for us, all the way from the simulation of those, moving on into understanding how those can impact our company, prioritizing what we should address based on our security control posture and risk perspective, and then of course push it into the remediation. And running this continuously is what's going to give us the assurance the next time an executive, a board member, would ask the same question that we asked today in the poll, how safe are we? We can give a definite yes, as opposed to the other options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I mean, to your point about sort of the continuous threat assessment and the continuous aspect of this, how does SafeBreach, and specifically, sort of ensure that everything that we're providing in terms of the inventory of attacks and attack methodologies is always kept up to date?
That's a great question, Jessica. And it goes to the second pillar of what you should be looking for, a solution that's a breach attack simulation. So the technology itself, as I mentioned previously, is something that you expect to be flexible, to follow you as a company, whether we're talking about cloud environments, on-prem, we're talking about different laptops and technologies. But then immediately the question begins, as Collins presented the great work of the IBM X-Force uncovering those attacks, is how soon you would expect this platform to include these indicators of compromise. And in other cases, when threat intelligence or attacks happening worldwide uncovered by different companies, how soon you could expect those. And this is where the hacker's playbook actually comes into place. So once you buy a breach and attack simulation platform, the hacker playbook is essentially what's going to help you drive down the risk by giving you a binary answers to, are you safe against this malware, or whether this technique could be applied into your company right now. So a couple of things that you should be obviously asking yourself when it comes to what would make this content appealing for you. So first of all, hackers change the technologies all the time. They evolve. As the good guys are basically chasing them, they would evolve into using different servers, different malwares. And so you would expect some kind of an SLA. You would expect some kind of update cadence that would match the reality out there. And so we're very proud to say that within SafeBreach, we have an SLA for emerging threats at least 24 hours. And so this would definitely to be in time with the threat. So when again you get the question, how safe are we against a threat, you can have the answer within 24 hours. The second thing is obviously to understand that we're talking about multiple operation systems. Each and one of those have their own attack vectors. We're talking about Linux, Mac, containers, cloud native environments, S3 on Amazon, for example. You would then expect this platform to have content that will be able to, again, give your security control testing across all these different infrastructure. And so we're talking about the hacker playbook. It needs to be one that will include all your infrastructure in it. And again, within SafeBreach, we're very proud to be the leading in this aspect, where we have close to 30,000 different breach methodologies and techniques embedded within our hacker playbook. So whichever environment you're interested in, whichever environment or technology you have, we have something for you to test with regarding to this technology. And last but not least, we're talking about the MITRE attack. And as Colin mentioned, there's a few different ways to measure risk, consume risk, and different methodologies to visualize risk. MITRE attack is one of those. It tends to be a little bit more technical, less on the business side, more about the controller side, but nonetheless, something that your executives might heard about or might ask you for. And so SafeBeach were not only aligned with the MITRE attack framework, we also had the pleasure to contribute into the MITRE attack framework. So we're definitely supportive of this initiative, and we continuously aligning ourselves and helping develop this to the next level.
Yeah, awesome. And one thing that we wanted to mention for our audience is that we'll be following up with everybody who attended today to invite you to test your defenses as well. We've developed a COVID-19 testing plan, and we will be providing access for all of you who opt in, where you can simulate the known COVID-19 indicators of compromise, see how your security controls are configured. So for all of you who answered, I'm not sure, this would be a good way for you to test it out and simulate campaigns of the threat actors that were associated also with the COVID-19 attacks. So there's a very long URL here. We will follow up with this via email to all of you, and you can sign up for sort of your free risk analysis. You'll get a report with that risk analysis and your recommendations. So wanted to make sure you were all available, or we're all aware that that will be available to you following the webinar. So
just before moving on to the next slide, I just want to emphasize that the X-Force blog post that Colin was referring to, the IOCs and the TTPs, including them, will be embedded in this testing plan. So the very same thing that Colin has presented in the webinars, we will be able to give you a way to test yourself against it.
Yeah,
and
great.
Of course.
Cool. And so we're going to be getting to questions here in a second. I just wanted to remind everyone, if you have a question, please go ahead and submit that, and we'll be answering any questions that come through in just a short minute. Before we do that, and while we're waiting for some questions to be submitted, Colin and Isaac, did you want to cover off on some of the recommendations to the audience today?
Yeah, definitely. COVID-19, while it has definitely turned the corner in the U.S., of course, the Delta variant, continues to raise concern, and vaccination programs across other countries continue to face significant challenges. So, above all, stay vigilant and remain on high alert that we're not out of the hot water, so to speak. That along those lines, 4 simple steps here, right? To know who your partners are, to know yourself, and what are they doing to stay secure? Not only your internal infrastructure, but some of your key partners. How can they gain access to sensitive data, and what controls do they have in place that protect that? Use multi-factor authentication. We published a separate intelligence report earlier in 2020 that we saw account takeover attempting to compromise accounts. If multi-factor authentication was enabled, oftentimes the threat actor would move on to something else. So easy win to be able to enable multi-factor authentication on your external critical assets, so that you can ensure even internal assets somewhere appropriate to protect yourself. That this is not anything new. Number 3, from a healthcare standpoint, but limit access to sensitive data. That in this case, sensitive data may have a different perspective of some of the transportation of the movement of the COVID-19 vaccine, for example, may not typically be considered sensitive data, but one of the potential targets that their credential campaign was focused on. And of course, move to a zero trust approach. That assume that your internal environment has gaps that can be exploited to gain access. No longer should we focus just on perimeter security, but we need to have a holistic approach internally. And then, as Sig was saying, utilize this intelligence data to be able to act out an attack. Not only to test your controls, but also to give your security response team insights of what an attack would look like. Be able to identify, this signature on this security control triggered here. Okay, maybe we need to reprioritize that, or that we maybe need to rework some of that so it's clearer that this is something that needs a more critical response. So 4 easy steps from a recommendation standpoint that, of course, not always that easy, but from that perspective, stay vigilant, remain high. And I think, Jessica, we have some additional resources and ways that the users can connect with us on more questions, etc.
Yeah, you bet. So if you guys want to interact and chat with either Colin or Isaac further, here's some links where you're going to be able to do that. You can find, obviously, Isaac on LinkedIn, and this is a link at ibm.biz where you can interact and communicate with Colin directly. And then we've also provided a few more resources related to the topics that we discussed today. I don't know, Colin, if you wanted to cover off on what some of the high points are on these.
Great. So we put a short link in here so that you don't have to write down the full URL. But the research that we published in April, that first IBM.biz points to it. Keeping up with the IBM security threat research, that we've created an intelligence hub to be able to go out there and go out looking regularly on anything new from a threat research standpoint that we publish, so we don't have to mine security intelligence or maybe some of the other mechanisms that we're sharing this information, that you can go to our threat research hub. From an export standpoint, the team that I'm proud of, and we continue to proudly carry that export's name in IBM Security. If you want to learn more about us or to engage us from a consultation standpoint, a couple links there. And of course, if you have an incident, we're here to help. That we have a hotline, write that down, put it on your whiteboard, put it on your keyboard, on a sticky pad. Give us a call if we can help reduce an incident or reduce the impact of incident, or investigate further what risks may be related to a specific incident that you're concerned about.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and take some questions. I have a few that have come in. Number one, how can I find out what other platforms SafeBreach integrates with? So Isaac, I don't know if you wanted to cover that one.
Sure. So as part of being a breach and attack simulation platform, and as Colin gave an example about understanding which security controller has fired and where that it fired, we have a vast integration with anything from your team platforms all the way to individual security controls. Now, those integrations are designed to consume the alerts and the different events that took out during the simulation period and basically correlated automatically so the operator can see from a single pane of glass exactly what the attack was doing, whether this attack was detected, mitigated, or both. And of course, also in some cases, a blind spot where the attack was managed to be successful without any alerts. That will be one type of integration. Other types of integration that we support today are to consume information from vulnerability managements, to overlay CVEs on top of the kill chains that we're able to simulate, as well as to consume threat intelligence from different tips to automatically weaponize those on demand. So these are just a few examples of the integrations that are supported by the SafeBreach platform.
Okay, thank you. Colin and Isaac, will either of you or your teams be speaking at Black Hat this year on research?
Colin, I will let you go first.
Colin may be on mute.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll go first and say that yes, the SafeBreach Labs are in fact presenting this year in Las Vegas. So I'm going to be there, and the team's going to be there as well in person. So we have one presentation submitted to Black Hat about fuzzing the Hyper-V, the hypervisor that runs Microsoft Azure. And we also have another presentation submitted into DEF CON, which we got accepted, that will be speaking about 0 days in Windows and uncovering them from patches.
Great, thanks, Colin. Oh, you're on mute still, I think. All right. Well, while Colin's getting his audio back, maybe we can cover the next question, Isaac, that came through, which is who from the security team generally is tasked with managing a breach and attack simulation platform? Like, how is that incorporated into the overall security team's responsibilities on average with maybe our clients? We can give an example.
Sure, it's a great question, and still we see some kind of dynamics between different customers and different sizes of companies. Mm-hmm. So traditionally, we're speaking about anything from the blue team and the red team, and of course, anything in between is the purple team. So we're looking about customers that wants to augment their SOC or to have more offensive capabilities. So not only monitoring for the alerts, but also engaging with the alerts from an offensive perspective. We're seeing red teams that using our platform to basically create baselines, and then they will operate on top of those baselines, so they can really concentrate in doing the work that they are best doing and kind of leave us to do all the more of the same attacks that are already existing in the industry. And of course, in different purple team exercises, our platform is pivotal in order to both provide visibility and ease of use to orchestrate such events.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Colin, back online.
Am I back here?
There you are. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Good. In my Bluetooth, luckily survived my talk, my portion, but did not survive the Q&A. So always be prepared for additional backups, right? So RSA, so our threat intelligence team is going to be covering some of the Iranian actors. That we did some research, captured some of their training videos. So we have a presentation on that, and I think we have a few other presentations from an IBM standpoint.
Cool. And I assume you meant Black Hat. I know RSA just happened.
Black Hat. Yeah.
It's always tough to keep it.
Yeah, it is Black Hat. These things, for me, run together anymore because RSA has become Black Hat, and Black Hat's become DEF CON, and DEF CON's become its own thing, etc.
Especially in a year where nobody physically attended any of those events. It's a lot easier for all of those to sort of stream together. All right. And then one last question that we got, Isaac, maybe you can take this one. In terms of, being able to communicate, we were talking a lot about how do you communicate the risk to the business. What are some recommendations, and maybe what are some features that breach and attack simulation can offer in terms of reporting that is something you can take, you can export, and then you can share with other stakeholders, including the executive team or the board, to help report on risk overall to the business?
Definitely. And also I would love Colin to pitch in and give his insight as well. I'll begin by saying that every investment that the business has done for security needs to be accounted for, whether it's a new security solution, a new process to adhere to a compliance, or even expanding the SOC to be bigger or more perhaps follow the sun kind of initiatives. And the only way to understand if the investment has the right return of investment on it is to measure it. And the measurements can be in multiple ways. You mentioned reporting, Jessica. So reporting that goes to explain how well the company does from a MITRE perspective, or how well the company does with respect to threat adversaries or threat groups like APT29, for instance. Basically to match the risk that the company decided and basically use the data that a platform like SailBeach can gather on the reality of the company to show how the data match the risk, for good or bad, of course, and then acting upon it. This is where the business can come through and do anything from changing the policy to taking new solutions to hiring consultancy company. All the options are on the table, and those could be now reflected and be discussed in a data-driven fashion. Colin?
And I mean, I think the thing is to start with an easy win, right? That as Itzik mentioned, being able to show that not only is our security technologies preventing certain things, that being able to evangelize where you've had a breach, well, you didn't have a breach, right? That because I think that's the challenge from a cybersecurity standpoint, is that we're always talking bad news. That when I look back a year ago, that there was an announcement of credentials being being leaked from the Pulse Secure vulnerability, right? So 900,000 credentials, being able to evangelize and say, okay, this is why we went with the different technology, or this is why that we kept on top of remote code exploits on the Pulse Secure, because we knew the quantification, the risk factor, right? That the value here of being able to mitigate those things sooner is valuable. That so being able to start with simple things, be able to evangelize where we've had successes, which is hard. That we often talk the incidents, we often talk the bad news, but being able to communicate in a manner, and then as Itzik mentioned as well, being able to test these simulations. Not only can we be able to see where our controls are strong and where we may need some additional refinement, but also we can start to bring in some of the process and the human factor, right? Where are some training areas that we need to focus on as a corporation? Where are some of the staffing models that we need to review or to ramp up? Because it's always, of course, people, processing, technology. The technology enables and empowers the people, but where we see gaps and where we see challenges, we can reassess and realign some of those things.
Awesome. Well, great. Thank you guys so much. I'm sure you join me in hoping that this conversation was very informative and enlightening for all of our attendees, particularly for our healthcare and our manufacturing attendees who answered that question and let us know which industries they were coming from. There's obviously some tremendous lessons to be learned from these attacks and these attack methodologies for all of the future efforts to distribute vaccines globally or even nationally. And we want to ensure that everybody has safe access to the medical solutions that they need at any given time. So thank you guys for your time. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Isaac. And thank you to all of you who attended. And as we mentioned, we'll be following up with you following the end of the broadcast with your offer for the free assessment. So look for that in your email. And thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.